That's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the Malazan world. You might hear some stuff. I have the heater running because, well, it's finally cold, which, I mean, I prefer to it being 115 degrees over here in Cali, so, today I have the second book in the Malazan, Books of the Malazan Empire series by E.N.C. Esslemont, co-creator of the Malazan franchise, universe, whatever you want to call it, with Return of the Crimson Guard. Non-spoiler. I liked it, but I didn't love it. E.N.C. Esslemont writes extremely well. In fact, you know, again, my channel started with the Star Wars Expanded Universe. I'm going to use this as an example. If you don't understand it, that's okay. But, you know, there's a lot of authors in the Star Wars Expanded Universe, you know. It's over 30 years of continuity and stories of different people that contributed to the universe, and some are better than others. If E.N.C. Esslemont had written in the Star Wars Expanded Universe, he would probably be in the top 10. That's how good he writes. However, Steven Erikson has this sort of spark, this sort of vibe, this sort of thing that he does in every book that I'm just missing from this. Now, I understand it's a different author, different themes, different intent, different style of writing. That's okay. That doesn't mean E.N.C. Esslemont is bad. In fact, he's very great. The comparison I used was to, one, Steven Erikson is a usual A student who decided to put in an A+++ assignment. Whereas, I don't know, E.N.C. Esslemont is either a B student or an A student, but he only got 1+ on his A on the report card. So, you know, he may not have all the pluses that the other guy has, but he still has an A+. So he still wins in the end, you know? Or, you go to a really nice restaurant, you know, like a 5-star, everything's great, the food's great, but it's not a world-renowned restaurant. This is really, like, the only difference. So, they're both fantastic. They're different. Ian focuses on action a bit more than I care about, and that's more of a personal thing than like a directly bad thing on his part. I just don't care about action that much, so it always... And there's a lot of it in here. On the flip side, too, I do think that, I mean, if you're doing a comparison, I mean, on its own it's fine, and it's better than a lot of things I've read, actually. But his prose, I just don't think are as eloquent as Steven tends to be. And it's not, again, not necessarily a bad thing, it's just something to note. I also think there's just too many characters in here. Now, I know there's a lot of characters in a lot of Steven Erikson's work, but somehow they all feel more fleshed out and human than a lot of them do here. A lot of them, for me, kind of blended into seeming the same. And so it was hard for me to really get, like, super invested in every plot thread. There were some where I was super invested, and then others where I just couldn't. By and large, the main plot is actually a lot of fun. We've a couple things going on. We have the Return of the Crimson Guard, the title of the book, because Quantali, which is the empire capital of the Malazan Empire, wasn't originally theirs, right? They usurped it, they took it over, it became their capital, but it was originally belonged to these other people. And so the Avowed, these Crimson Guard members that are, like, not ascendant, they're not gods, but they are also above normal people because they can't die until they've gone with this vow, kind of like the Talana Mas a little bit. And, you know, the leaders, you know, they've come back to sow revenge against the against the Malazan Empire. And on the flip side of that, you also have a bunch of disgruntled nobles and people that actually were part of the Old Guard. You know, we always hear about the Old Guard in the main Malazan Book of the Fallen, where, you know, it was this huge team of people that went and made an entire empire on the backs of these couple. You know, you know, Emperor Caliban, Dancer, Lacine, you know, Teshrin, you know, and other people that are in this book. They all are what made this universe what it is today. But they also they're doing a separatist movement, thanks to Star Wars prequels, against Lacine. So you got that going on, you got the Return of the Crimson Guard going on, then you have the gods still playing their games in the background, as they always seem to do. So there's a whole bunch of things kind of converging, and converges near the end of the book, this big clash, and then a big death at the end. We also have Skinner and Cowell, who are they're the bad guys of the Crimson Guard. There's no bad guy in the Book of the Fallen, right? Except for, I guess, maybe the crippled god. But there's a bunch of people, you know, who um, on every side. You kind of like a lot of the people there, right? Even in Crimson Guard. But then you have Cal and Skinner, which are meant to be more the bad guys because they're trying to usurp the purpose of the Crimson Guard to further their own ends. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. My favorite parts of the book involve this new character named Kyle. Yes, just Kyle. He has a longer name, but everybody calls him Kyle. And he's sort of a POV character in a sense because he's ignorant on all this stuff, so we get to learn a lot through him, which is, you know, a nice little change of pace from most of, you know, Malazan, where it's like, figure it out. And then the other plot line that had me the most engaged would be the Malik Rel stuff. Because here, unlike every Malazan book so far, Steven Erikson has this thing where he cares about the larger picture, the end game, the big goal, the big thing. But when it comes to, I mean, he did do it in Midnight Tides because we had a little bit of the politics going on with the tribes and the city of Lether. But when it comes to specifically the politics of the Malazan Empire and what's going on today, he kind of just either completely ignores it or glosses over it because it's not his thing. That's Ian C. Esslemont's thing. You know, the most we got was in Bone Hunters, but here we get to see Malik Rel really playing like this 4D chess game as he tries to, you know, obtain more power. And so is Lacine, and here Lacine gets so much character. I mean, we had bits of her before in the novels by Erikson, but she, you know, and you see this a little bit in the last book too, but she's actually such a tragic figure. You know, Lacine usurps the throne in Guardians of the Moon. We hear about that. But, you know, she had an entire team of people. But then also what you realize when you read Night of Knives is like, yeah, but Caliban and Dancer would bail all the time on their responsibilities. They were the emperor and the second hand in command. And it's like, imagine you have the president of the United States, or pick your leader. I don't really give a damn, but you know, they're sworn in office. Let's say you love them. Don't go. No, nothing. I'm not getting political here. I don't give a damn. I'm just saying, like, you have somebody in charge. You know, expect them to do some stuff, and then for months on end, they just no one knows where they're at. They can't contact them. No one knows where they are. So, you know, like, so that was the position that Lacine was in every time that, you know, Caliban and Dancer would go off to do some mystical, big, epic D&D adventure. She'd be left in the dust to pick up the pieces and keep the place running. You know, at some point she had enough is enough, and she took actions in her own hands. But unlike Caliban and Dancer, who, you know, as Shadowthrone and Cotillion, they're a pair. They have each other's backs usually. I mean, I haven't seen them betray each other yet, but like they've kind of been hand in hand. Like they've shared this burden together. But Lacine, on the other hand, she has actively remained, it seems, alone. She has a bunch of people that work under her, but yet nobody that she confides in, nobody that she trusts in. So it's just really sad because I mean, not that she's a good person necessarily. Not, she didn't have altruistic motives in taking over, you know, the empire. Let's be clear about that. But at the same time, like, she was already doing it on her own. She just made it official. Um, so I feel bad for her more so in this book than I think I did in any other book. But so the Imperial politics is probably my absolute favorite, and then Kyle, and along with Kyle you get the other portion of the stories with Eriko and Traveler, and that was also really good. And then everything else, I don't know, for me, it kind of blends in. I did not really fall in love with most of the other characters. I thought they were fine. Didn't really love them. And it's just fine. Um, so this book was more of a 50-50 for me on whether or not I loved it or hated it. But if the little summary I gave sounds like intriguing you, I do recommend it. There's a gap in between Bone Hunters and Reaper's Gale, and this fits perfectly there. So this would be a good place to go and read it. Now, from an interview I saw, there's a certain death in this book that doesn't get revealed into book 9 of the Malazan books. Now, people might call that a spoiler, except that if you're doing this publication order-wise, which I didn't, but even if you are, this book still comes out before Dust of Dreams. So either way, you would know about this death if you were reading all the books. This wouldn't be a surprise to you in book 9. So either way, this big death you would have known about before Dust of Dreams. So if you wanted, you could read it here like I did, or you could just do a publication. However you want to do it, you can do it. But I read it here because it wasn't a big deal to me. Um, um, but yeah, I'm trying to think what else I can talk about non-spoiler wise. And I mean, like I said, if you like action, if like you're a big fan of action and stuff, Ian delivers. He's a bunch of action scenes, you know. As I said, this is a me thing personally. When I read a novel, it is really hard for me to get invested in action scenes. It is hard for me to visualize it. I don't know why it's my problem. Certain authors have done a better job of making me able to like envision such things, but a lot of authors, personally for me, just can't, and that's not their fault. That's a me problem. Um, but so what I gravitate to is conversations, dialogue, themes, philosophical stuff. If there's stuff like that in there, like God Emperor Chef Kiss, 80% of it was just talking and philosophing. There wasn't even friggin' much action or anything going on. There was occasionally, and that was crazy. In Frank Herbert's God Emperor, but a lot of it was just talking. So it was a lot easier for me to get into that. You know, I mean, I'm still a guy. You know, I still like I like me some action, but I usually say that for comic books or like movies or video games. You know, where I can visually see it. And when it comes to novels, I gravitate toward the characters and the story and everything. So, as opposed to action scenes, like I read what's happening, like my brain registers it. I'm just not visualizing it, so I'm just moving on. So, except for Carsa scene, Steven Erickson has made me, when he fought that frickin' Kachane Shamal, I was like, yeah, I see this. But anyway, I think that's about the gist of what I want to talk about non-spoiler wise. But do I recommend it? Yes. Is it, if you go in expecting Steven Erickson, you are setting yourself up for disappointment. Do I think it's on the same caliber as the Book of the Fallen? I don't. But that's okay. It's different. It's its own thing. Um, but you can't call it fan fiction and you can't call it supplemental. It just isn't. This is actually like very important to the overall narrative. And on top of that, you know, this is a co-created franchise. Without Ian, you wouldn't have the Book of the Fallen. Yes, Steven Erickson wrote the first 5, but it is him and his best friend's contributions that made this world what it is. So make sure to give respect where respect is due. In fact, I've of the mindset after all the videos I've watched and things of different people talking about it, I've come to a conclusion that I don't like to think about the Book of the Fallen as a 10-book series and then the books of the Malazan Empire as 6 separate things. No, it is a 16-book series together, much like New Jedi Order in the Expanded Universe is a 19-book epic. This is a 16-book epic. They are all a part of one congruent story, and that's how you should look at it too. In my opinion, do what you want. But I'm going to get into spoilers. They're kind of sporadic, all over the place. If you don't want that, get out of here. We have Trachonis in the opening, which is pretty cool. Deneth mentions Animandrous Rake. Then we move on to Book 1, Despair is End, and we get introduced to Kyle. Here I just wrote down a bunch of names. So we have Stoop, he's a saboteur and an older guy. We have Trench and Stalker. Smokey, a mage. Kaz DeVore, a founder of the Crimson Guard. And nobody knows where he's been all this time. We get introduced to Greymane. Remember that name for later. By later, I mean different books, not necessarily this one. Meek, Harmon, Rare, Pilgrim, Whitey, Ambrose, Warlock Shen, Geddon, Swordsman, Bull, Cirque, Warren of the Hold of the Sky, Warren or Hold of the Sky, Unta, Malazan's capital, which is a first for the series. We haven't really explored Unta that much. We've heard about it, but we get introduced to Possum, who is the new head of the Claw, which, before it was Pearl. Pearl died, and then it was offered to Caleb, and Caleb didn't take it, so this guy named Possum has it. Again, we get to see Lacine. We meet Ariko and Traveler. Also, Malik is kind of like coercing Mail into doing stuff, but wait a second. Mail is Bug, so is he talking to Bug? This actually had me confused the most of the entire book, because Mail is Bug. That's what we learned in Midnight Tides. So I don't know what's happening with that. But yeah, politics with Malik. Malik is controlled the treasury and government bureaucracy, whereas Corbo Dome, he's in charge of what remains of the military. So again, they have extremely powerful positions. And they Malik kind of already, we saw in Bone Hunters, he kind of powered his way through into that, And Lacine recognizes that he's making power plays, but she can't exactly take him out. So there's sort of this whole game being run between them in the court, in the Empire. Very Game of Thrones like. But this, I don't like Malik Raw. I think he's a terrible person. But this book specifically, I mean, the end of Bone Hunter started it, but it's really here where it's like, man, I really like Malik Raw as a villain, and he's not just like evil. He's he's a dick. There's not really that many redeeming qualities, but he does learn from his mistakes. He's willing to admit when he's wrong, and he, for all intents and purposes, he is a good leader. He's a good politician. So it just made me really appreciate him a lot more, and it's gonna make a reread really fun with the context of Return of the Crimson Guard to go back and read like Dead House Gates and House of Chains with Malik now in mind after having read this. So we also have Talk, not our Talk, but Talk the Elder, who is a Seti warlord. We also notice here, I mean, this is pretty explicit in Bone Hunters as well, but Corbo does not understand Malik's game. He thinks that he's one-upping him, but inevitably he's playing right into Malik's hands, doing exactly what Malik wants. There's a section also, there's this whole thing with Kyle, where he witnesses Cowell and Skinner, the leads of the Crimson Guard, killing other people in order to remain in control. But Kyle witnesses this, and therefore he's on their hit list, and he has to run away. So there's this whole thing about that. So you have all these different storylines going on. Again, it feels like a little bit too much at times. But so he's with Eriko and Traveler, and Eriko talks about Kaller. Now remember, Kaller, again, I was a bit confused, but this book actually fixed something. It's a very simple thing, but I was confused back when I read Memories of Ice. I'm like, oh, I thought this was an origin story for the crippled god, like that Kaller is the crippled god, but it isn't. He was able to control everything because the crippled god gave him the power to do so, but the crippled god's a separate thing. But he just works for the crippled god, which was something that I apparently was just too stupid to realize. Then we go into Book 2, The Eternal Return. Iron Bars makes his return. We met him before. It was cool to see him again. We get to see Tesharin. Again, Tesharin remains one of this interesting things with Esslemont, because he started off as such a stereotypical, like, bad dude in Guardians of the Moon, and we get little bits of him throughout, Books of the Fallen, but he seems to have fallen to the wayside, fallen, in terms of the wayside in the main plot of those stories. He might come back. But here, you know, in Nine to Knives, we get so much more with him, where he's a bit more of a complicated fellow, which I really appreciate. I already talked about non-spoiler scene and her not sharing the burden of leadership. It's just holding it all on her own. We also have Kiska here from Night of Knives. She was that young girl who worked with Teshrin for a bit. So she's back and she's doing stuff, and I really liked her here. I didn't love her, but it was good to see her again. I was also a bit confused. Hurl, I think he was one of the Crimson Guard guys at one point. Faree's a crippled god, but he was like already free, I thought. But he wasn't exactly, because he's still chained. I don't know, it was a bit confusing on that section. Oh, here's an interesting little quote from the crippled god. Those who free me be my enemies. Those who enslave me kneel to me. When the end of all things comes, as surely it does, on which scale stands you, final balance, and what does it say? Recompense. Or something like that. That was a good little thing. The cripple god talks to Kyle, tries to persuade him to do something, but Kyle's wind god man saves him. Kaller, who works for the crippled god, goes and attacks Eriko, and Eriko wants Kyle to bear witness as they fight, and Kaller kills him. Which, again, Eriko, another thing we learned is that he's like the original, because, you know, we know that Karsa Orlong is the Tabloki, but that this guy is one of the original things, because everything else is an offshoot of what he is. So he wanted to go back home to his people, you know, so he lets himself kind of die. But then Kaller wants to, you know, rip off his head. It's like a, yes, I've done it. So he wants to cut off his head. And that's when Traveler steps in, because there was this whole thing where Kyle's like, Traveler, you just stood there. You did nothing. You let your friend die. Like you could have done something. And Traveler's like, no, I made a promise. You know, like, he this is what he wanted to do. This is what he gets to do. But Traveler did step in when Kaller was going to cut off his head, because he's like, no, you killed him. That was what we agreed upon. Leave it alone. Leave the body alone. And Kaller wouldn't listen, so then it became Traveler versus Kaller. And that was really cool. Probably one of my favorite parts of the book. And then Traveler's actually holding his own, so Kaller kind of bails and runs off back to the crippled god. Then, frick. I stopped writing book 3 and book 4, but we've jumped through different books now. So Kyle finds Kaz. Kaz finally wakes up, returns to his place as leader of the leader of the Crimson Guard. So that was cool. And of course, things happen with Skinner and Cal, and Skinner prays to a certain individual to save him. And then the big thing of this book, if you don't want a major thing for the rest of the series, this is include Erickson's, then get out. Alright? I'll give you a second. I'll give you a warning. That was it. Here we go. So Topper returns. That's not the thing, but we're getting to it. And Topper fights Cowl. They're going through like wars and stuff. It's kind of crazy. It's hard for me to grasp what was happening. But they're fighting. And at some point, Lysine is murdered. The Empress of the Empire is no more. Lifeless, but a little bit at peace, like a weight has been lifted. And she looks younger, like her age, instead of carrying the entire weight of the universe on her shoulders. And because of that, there's no formal voting, right, for who's next in charge, so what makes the most logical sense? Who was the closest second in command to Lysine at this point in time? Malik Rel. Yeah, that was the big thing. Like I said, this has been kind of a... Deadhouse Gaze showed me that Lucine was more complicated than it appeared. I mean, she could have been completely BSing, but it didn't feel like she was lying. We get to Bone Hunters. We get the whole scene in court with her and Tavor and Malik and Corbo. And we see how she's playing 40 chess with everyone. She knows that Malik's, scheming, and she knows that she's working around it. But she never confided in anyone. She didn't even trust in Tavor. She didn't trust in anyone. She only trusted in herself. Which, at the end of the day, yes, it's hard to trust people. Because people often, I know this, people let you down. People betray you. But you also can't carry the weight of the entire world just on your own. And in the end, it ended up batting her in the butt. But she's a very tragic character. And I think Esslemont, more than anything else, helped me. I mean, this and then the last little bits of the story in Bone Hunters that Erickson did really made me start to appreciate her a lot more. Yeah, Malik Rel's basically Emperor now, so good for him. And then we learn that the crippled god saved Skinner, so long as Skinner's willing to work for him. And that's kind of where we leave off with this story. There's a bunch of things I skipped over, of course. All these books, whether it be Esslemont's or Erickson, there's always like millions of videos and hours you could spend talking about any individual book. But I'm doing it by myself. I got work in a few hours. So here I am, kind of rough and tumbling it. But overall, I had fun with it. It's not my favorite thing. I hear that Esslemont's books only continue to get better and better and better. So I'm excited for Stonewielder. I'm excited for Orb Scepter Throne. And then the last two books that take place after, or that we should be reading after the Crippled God. So, all that to say, I had fun with it. If anything else, it was an excuse to be in the Malazan world a little bit longer, which is always good. Because the moment, I finish the Crippled God, like, sure, I can go back and reread this series sometimes, but it will never be the same as that initial first time, right? It's the same thing with Expanded Universe, Star Wars, or anything else. So, I want to savor my first time as long as possible. Enjoy it for as long as possible. So, if I can take these detours to stay in the universe just a little bit longer, then I will do so. But that's pretty much it, guys. Thank you all so much for watching. Enjoy this video, give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you next time with probably just Book 1 and Book 2 and prologue thoughts on Reaper's Gale. Till then, I'll see you.